Welcome to Hometown Television and Hometown's Community Conversation. My name is Fred Honold, host for this series. We welcome our community from Summit and all surrounding towns into this conversation. We believe that from time to time, we should get a variety of events and organizations and people highlighted here at Hometown so you know what's going on in your areas. And by all means, as we develop this conversation, this opening one will be on education in Summit, education in the surrounding areas. We'll take a high look and a look specifically. We'd ask you to get involved, both through our online website, as well as Facebook, as well as info@hometowntv.org to ask us any all questions. But let's get down to the discussion, and let me introduce our guest. We have George Lukash here of Summit. George, welcome. Beth Breyer of Summit. We'll give your backgrounds in a little moment. Lisa Allen of Summit, and Dave Baumgars of Summit.
Thank you, Fred.
And I'm Fred Honold here, as I mentioned. And just for our audience, just so you're aware, for those who are attuned to the politics of this time here in 2016, it being March, that we are equally represented, bipartisan on both sides of the table. I, for one, am not affiliated with either party, and they're so registered. But with that, if we could have our quick backgrounds on each. George, your background, please.
Thanks, Fred. My name is George Lukacs. I've been a resident of Summit with my wife for 27 years. I have 3 children who went K through 12 in the public school district. I've been on the Board of Education for 6 years, and no longer on the Board of Education, and I've been on Wall Street for about 30 years.
And in your final year on the board, you served as president of the board.
I did.
Good. Beth?
Thanks, Fred. Glad to be here. Like George, I'm a longtime resident of Summit, 27 years. For the last 10 years, have been the news editor here at Hometown TV, and I serve on the board as well.
Good. Welcome to both. Lisa.
Thank you, Fred. I've been in Summit for about 7 years now. I have 2 young children in Franklin, 9 and 11, and I've been very actively involved in Summit and enjoy being here, so thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
David?
Fred, moved here in 1985 from Washington, D.C.
You've got me beat by 2 years. Okay.
That's right,
All
2 years on, yeah. Basically commuted to the as a career as a national bank examiner. When I retired, I became more involved in city volunteer opportunities, served like George on the Board of Education, and then also on the Common Council.
All right, good. Well, thank you. By way of scoping for our community, we're thinking of broadly casting the net in terms of what the conversation will be about. And I think it's important when you talk any topic that issues well defined are issues on the way of being resolved. And the more participation, the more facts we have out on the table, the better we can get into a conversation. Going forward, we have our roundtable here, but we'll go at a cadence that every other show, George and Lisa, you as co-host, will go forth and you'll interview some specific individual or constituency. Say perhaps the superintendent of schools here in Summit, or the head of the Summit Taxpayers Association, or members of the Board of Ed, or people out of the PTO, etc. But we also want to think about the fact that while we exist here in Summit, we exist within the context of a county, within the context of a state and a nation. And so the more we can educate ourselves and our community can come in and join in the conversation and ask us questions and educate as well, we'll be on our way, I think, to a robust and rich conversation. With that in mind, where do we begin? And I'm thinking it's always interesting to start out with the budget and then how budgets get constructed, follow the money as they say, and then we'll take it from there in terms of thinking about the city, the school system, the county, how the city of Summit effectively is the billing agent for that. And then I'd like to get into, with the expertise here around the table, what's going on within the school system itself and how those decisions get made, and the process, the interplay back and forth between the Board of Ed and the City of Summit. David, you have some interesting figures there in terms of breakouts. Notice you have a chart there in terms of the dollars that go on.
Yes, yeah, certainly. We were talking earlier before we started filming this conversation, the history of the increases by the city, the Board of Ed, and the county, Union County, over the last, since 2006. And the figures show that in terms of the city, we started out 2006 in the 7-8% range.
Of an increase.
Of an increase each year. And then in about 2011, 2012, we started going under 1%.
Okay. Now, as we're talking about that, very briefly, the tax dollar gets divided up how? in terms of a tax dollar?
Roughly 51% for the Board of Ed.
For the schools,
The
okay.
next larger portion, 20, would be the county, and the remainder, the lesser amount, to the city, to the
All right,
municipality.
good. So that's how you divide up $1 of taxes,
Right,
okay?
right.
And with that, we'll talk a little more about what's accelerating more than others.
Yeah, I think that's important to talk about because there really are actuarial realities that we have to look at. If you look at the last 5 years, what David was talking about, you've seen about a 5 to 7% increase in the county per year. You've seen about 1% to 1.5% for both the city and the Board of Education. If in fact that increases at the same level, you're talking about more of your dollars going to the county, and from the numbers I've seen, 10% of our county dollars come back to us. So if in fact it continues at this pace, the typical Summit resident will be paying most of his tax dollars to the county, and that's in 7 or 8 years, if in fact the numbers continue to increase as they are. That's a tipping point in my estimation. I don't think we're going to get there, but I'm not going to be forecasting where we are either.
That's an excellent point. Beth, as you think about it, what I hear George saying is that the county, at the growth rate it is, and we'll come back to David here in a moment, could begin to crowd out the oxygen of what we're doing for the city and the school.
That's what I'm hearing as well, Fred. And how does this Union County compare to other counties? Is this happening in Morris County and Essex County, our neighboring counties?
If you look at exactly what we're paying per student, it is more than anybody else in Union County. Summit does pay its unfair share, if I may be so bold as to say that. If you look at other communities around us, Chatham is much less, and their school district is every bit as good as ours. Again, the profile of the city is different than we are, but they're paying much less per student, and their academic achievements is very high there. So at $16,000 to $17,000 per student, that's something we have to think about as we move forward.
And getting back to the numbers here in a moment, Lisa, when you think about hometown, we cover at least 32 communities. We cover over 4 counties, from Union to Morris to Essex to Somerset.
Yep.
This would be interesting in the future to find out the best question,
Yeah.
what we cover, right?
Absolutely. I think when you were talking about other counties and what they pay, I believe down south, it's nominal what goes to the county. So what the burden that we really take on with the county right now at $40 million approximately that we send out, when people go to these Board of Ed meetings and are concerned about our education, what are we throwing away, what are we giving away, what are we not giving to our children, we really need to start to think about what's that 40 million, because at some point you're never going to go in reverse, right? So understanding how do we compare, why is it Union County tends to be higher?
It's a good point, because when I see parents coming to the Board of Education meetings, which I did over the years, as have you, David, they're worried about the budget, they're worried about money. At the same time, they have special interests where they want more money put in. The best thing that the Summit residents can probably do is look toward the county and see what they're doing exactly and become familiar with what services they're getting and what they're not. Because you're right, that part of the budget of our dollar is going to really cause an issue between the city and the Board of Education. And the Board of Education is buffeted by so many different pressures, and the county being probably the largest one right now.
So with that in mind, just finishing out the numbers, David, you took us from 2006, where the town and the school budget was growing 6-7%, and it's been managed down to less than 1% a year. What happens when you look at the county numbers going back to 2006 and bringing them to today in terms of percentage growth?
Sure. Well, the county, actually, they started low in the sense of their increases. They in 2006, they were like 2.85%. They went up to 5.01, then they went negative in 2008 to a negative 0.63. And then they started climbing. They were 608, 609, 382, 10.5% increase in 2012, and then down to 793 last year, 299, and 2015. 2015 was 5.64. So they're staying above that 2% cap. So they're using those exclusionary waivers to get above that 2% cap.
And they're not
So-
confined to a 2% cap, are they?
No, not really. No, it's more to the city and the Board of Ed.
And in effect, what the county can do is unilaterally decide what its budget is. And then I think what happens is it gets apportioned to towns based on the market value of those towns.
Correct.
Exactly right.
Right.
And when you bring up those numbers, to me, it's very difficult to see those kind of increases over the last 5 years. when you're in a deflationary environment like we've been over the last 4 or 5 years. Our interest rates are basically zero here. So when people are putting their money, let's say very typically in a bank and getting 1%, and their taxes are going up from the county at 4, 5, 6, 7%, that's an issue for anybody. And I think that's a problem that we have to deal with. Again, I think that the Summit resident has to get much more involved, or as involved with the county problems as they are with the Board of Education, because it's going to affect their lives in 5 to 6 years, a lot more than it is now.
And George, is our representation on the county through the freeholders?
I think it is through the freeholders, absolutely.
We have had residents that will appear at the freeholder meetings in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and advocate for ways to cut the county budget, you know, how they ought to cut. And one example was Reynolds. They sold Reynolds Hospital. That's private now, and so that helped. So it's a little bit surprising that they're still in that 6% range in terms of their increase.
And Lisa, you found out recently from some of your research in advance that apparently there is a bill moving through both the Assembly and potentially the Senate, that where we have a superintendent in each town, there has been a county superintendent, and then we have a secretary that I guess is the Secretary of Education for all of New Jersey. But explain to us ever so briefly what's going on with this movement about a county superintendent and what may happen to town superintendents.
Sure. So this was a little known thing that someone actually sent to me, and I just discovered this. And what it's called is the Principal Empowerment Act. And what that does is it actually died last year. The bill died last year, but it's going to be reintroduced through the Senate under S-177. And that, in essence, gets rid of all superintendents across the state. And then what they do is those principals of each elementary become in control of their school and report up to the county superintendent, which to me, I find is going to be a detriment to our school. You can't have people rolling up to the county, in my opinion. I don't believe that rolling up to the county would be the most efficient, because you're going to have these giant regional school districts that are allocated to the county. So we already send $40 million to the county. In essence, they will get control of the budget of our $69 million budget, because the county superintendent, once we get rid of the local superintendents, they will then have a seat on our Board of Ed. So you know, more on that. It's quite troubling, actually.
So how far along is this bill?
So it died last year. It was introduced by 2 senators down south, but it is, my understanding is it's going to be reintroduced this year under another bill. I don't know if you know, if you're shaking your head. Okay. So, and it's going to be reintroduced this year. And so I think, you know, whatever happens with it, I'm going to keep a keen eye on it, and I think that, you know, everybody in Summit should really pay attention.
That's very important.
Yeah, because I think that when you look at the county, there's really no accountability to what gets sent, and if only 10% is coming back to Summit, you know, at what point is going to be going to the county for our schools? And when you look at how the taxes are estimated, excuse me, they're based, the estimation is based on property value, right? So Summit has a higher property value than an Elizabeth. So how much of that money would end up being funneled out of our Board of Ed budget?
Money that was just earmarked for our schools,
Right.
in addition to what we're paying for the county.
Right.
So net bottom line is any increase in county, Board of Ed, or city budget goes directly to the property tax that we pay.
Yeah. You know, really, at the very top of it, and I've said this before in a few different meetings, you know, New Jersey operates under home rule. There are 2 ways typically states are organized. One's home rule, where the municipalities have the power, and the other is Dillon rule, where the states have the power. So New Jersey historically has always been home rule. So we have 525 municipalities in the state. We have about 620 school districts in the state. We have more towns, more municipalities in New Jersey than California, if you can believe that. All of the monies, and we receive no money, no property tax money from the state. They do give us small grants for different reasons, but within the state, all of our funding comes from property taxes. And our property tax is the highest in the nation, New Jersey. The property tax is the highest in the nation, and property tax per capita is second highest in the nation. So that's our problem. We have these administrative structures what did I say? 525 for the city, 625 for the school districts. We have all these administrative structures: superintendents, city administrators, deputy city administrators, deputy superintendents, police, fire. Although in some cases there are volunteer fire departments like Chatham, like Mountainside. So we have all these duplications, but we love it. I mean, we like home rule. Fanwood and Scotch Plains, the donut. Scotch Plains is the donut, Fanwood's the whole, and they don't consolidate. They don't merge. I think the last merger of two or more municipalities in Summit occurred maybe in 1952. So there's no appetite. We love this, and consequently, to the Board of Ed, we've got in Jersey the best schools in the nation, most likely. I probably prove it. And in Summit, especially so. I mean, as we know, people move to Summit for the schools to include special aid education. So it's right at the top. It's all this infrastructure that we try to manage, but we love it.
Yeah.
Well, and this is excellent, because I think what we want to do is, as we're educating ourselves, we're educating the community, and having the facts at hand is important. So that is an interesting
Yes.
point. Right? Home rule, in a way, is a blessing and a curse.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You know, the good news is that we get the funding and we can stay local, and the bad news is it costs us more because of all the infrastructure built in.
Sure.
Right? Now, Beth, over time, is our editor here at Hometown News, which appropriately, a few months ago, we've taken a pause on. We're going to come back with a monthly magazine focusing on points. But you've often gotten out with questions of the week, and you've asked people a lot of questions, and it's been pretty instructive. People in Summit and the surrounding area are very curious about what's going on.
They're curious, and they also know a great deal. This goes to home rule. But if you ask them about the county, I don't know if they would be as knowledgeable. I think there's a strong draw here to be part of our government, to be part of our schools. To the county, I haven't seen it as much.
You know, can I add on to that?
Please.
The county, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that we are the only county with all at-large freeholders. So if that is the case, we have no representation in Summit. So I think there are things that we can do. I think it takes about 40,000 signatures. If we said to our constituents in Summit and said, hey, sign this petition so that we can change the representation in Freehold.
To be warded.
To be worded.
Because it's our
yeah,
culture
right.
not to be part of the county. It's separate and apart from what we see as Summit, much more
It's going to be separate until it starts hurting a little bit more. That's gonna be the
Like Lisa
problem.
says, the problem we have is the western municipalities don't have representation on the freeholder board. The freeholders are Elizabeth, Linden, Plainfield. Nobody from Berkeley Heights, New Providence, Summit. I think the last freeholder rep we had in Summit was maybe 1996 or 7.
that
Former
right?
Mayor
Frank
Frank
Lear,
Lear. Yeah.
right.
So no matter what the party is, we need a representative, a freeholder that represents western districts. I'm sorry, municipalities, Mountainside included.
Right.
That would be, a step forward.
Union County, I believe, is 21 towns altogether.
Yeah.
And so we're on the farthest end, the seat being Elizabeth on the far end of
Right.
the county. So it sounds like going forward, as we're thinking about the co-hosting, it'd be interesting for county representatives, the superintendent of the county, whatever, so we learn and we become more educated with our community on this.
It wouldn't hurt to have a freeholder on as well.
Wouldn't hurt to have a freeholder, right? And that we can do. And then I think, given again that hometown spreads out over 4 counties, it would be interesting to get a flavor from Morris, from Essex, from Somerset and Union. Sure. So we think about how we balance that. Given the nature of the discussion, we have much to talk about. Why don't we come back here into Summit? And as a prelude to that, David, can you give us the most recent numbers, total dollar amounts for the city of Summit, for the school, and for the county? And then I'd like to talk about how this budget within Summit gets allocated out and how those decisions get made.
So you're asking for the totals for
The three major
the three entities.
constituents.
Okay, so we're talking 2015. The total school was $65,686,713,000.
Okay.
That represents 50.4% of the total.
You gotta have like
pie.
an accounting background or something, given the specificity, right? Yeah.
Well, you asked for it. You're going to get it. You
I
asked
got
for
it.
it.
And thank you.
We are precise.
You're going to get it. You're going to get it. Now, so the city.
Just for me, 66 million.
Yeah, we'll let you round it off to 66
Thank you, I
million.
appreciate that. Go ahead.
And for the city, the 2015 budget was 28,082,967.
million,
So
right?
28 million. 28 million.
Okay.
That's 21.9%. Call it 22 if you want.
All right, I
Okay,
will.
okay.
Be assured I will.
Yeah. And then the county is at, I'm not even going to go at 37 million. I'm not
All right.
going to go anything beyond that.
You're a quick study.
28, but I will go 28.4%.
Okay.
So if you add those percentages up, you come to 99.9. So there's a little bit of rounding there. But
You really are an
yeah.
accountant. Hey, listen, just kidding you here. So the total amount all in is approximately what? When you look at
well, the grand total is 131 million.
131 million.
Yeah.
So one can think of Summit as a business that's about 131 million, all things in terms of monies it collects.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what will occur then over time is the town has this mechanism. And Beth, I know over time as you've gotten into looking at various constituencies within town, hometown has been allied with the City of Summit. City of Summit is one of our major funders here.
Yes.
We will do showcase the meetings live
From Town Hall, yes.
from Town Hall. And we've actually held debates in the past and whatnot. But what's kind of interesting is then how our structure of government is. And my understanding is that, Lisa, you may have thoughts here too, is that there are 12 types of potential governments in New Jersey that a town can adopt. And we have what's been typically known as a weak mayor, strong council. However, when you begin to read the charter, the mayor has quite a bit of power. For example, the mayor will appoint unilaterally, if he or she so chooses, all the members of the Board of Ed, but apparently there's more of an informal process as to how that happens. I believe the mayor is also in a position to appoint members of the planning board
Correct.
unilaterally, again, based on how they go about doing that. And then I think other points defer to the council in terms of how budgets get set, the appropriations that go out and all. But the point is that money, this 131 million, the county basically puts to us that we're going to have to send them a check for 37. But then within that, the 66 for the school and the 28 for the city gets apportioned in a different way. And there's a bit of a process that it goes by. So when you were on the board, George, just take us through the Board of School estimate mechanism, and Dave will come back to you for the whole thing in terms of how that gets decided, at least at this point in time.
Well, I think you have to start with looking at the 2% tax levy cap that was instituted in 2010. People think it's a hard 2%. It's a very soft 2% because there's numerous things that David and I were just talking earlier that are excluded: healthcare, debt that's issued, emergencies, capital expenditures. There's a whole host of things. I think there's 5 that are excluded from that 2%. So people are moving within that 2% as far as giving in their budget school to school as to what they need. And I think most of them are starting from a zero-based thinking as opposed to what they did 10 years ago and just add on what was necessary. So there's a...
And just on that point, that's something that when you were on the board in the tenure, you began to move to that.
I think
right?
we-
Sort of a bottom-up 0%.
Well, people always talked about a zero-based budgeting because it sounded good, but
Right.
it didn't really occur. So I think every line item is looked at much more carefully. My belief is that the Board of Education has done an extraordinary job in the last couple of years. The years I've been off, actually. Because they're buffeted by so many different pressures. You know, healthcare is an issue. That's a very high percentage of the budget. Special education is a very high, and there's very little control that these board members have. They have control over a certain amount of the budget, but a lot of things are fixed in there. They're baked into the pie, as it were. So it makes it difficult for them. That's why it's really critical that when the board does come up with a budget, that they actually can substantiate and actually articulate what each line means. I'm not sure that we as residents of Summit have actually asked about that because we want the best for our children and we assume that we are getting the best for our children. But there's a point, again, where you're going to have to look at every single line item much more carefully. And I think that's not being quite done yet, but it's getting there.
And on that point, this could be for your show when both of you co-host a community conversation going forward. The head of business in Summit School Board, Lou Pepe,
Yep.
to talk to him specifically about the budget. Lisa?
Yeah, I just want to jump in really quick too in understanding what the unfunded mandates are, because you have the acronym IDEA, right? The Individual Disabilities with Education Act, where the special education has to be funded, but it's pushed down from the feds, but they don't fund it.
So we're talking about mandates, it's either a Fed mandate or a state
state
mandate.
mandate.
But it's unfunded, which means that the town then has to assume.
Yeah, so we're carrying that burden, which is
Yes.
an important burden, but I think people should understand those mandates.
And that's true in every
a very,
town, is that
very
correct,
good
Lisa?
point.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay.
very good point.
Right, absolutely.
So we go through the towns sort of bottom up coming up with the budget.
Yep.
Then what happens is there's this committee,
Yes, Operations Committee.
operations.
That goes through the budget and discusses and presents to the rest of the board what they see as the budget that they've accumulated from the schools, the principals, and the principals are getting feedback from everybody within the district. During that period of time, you're going to have discussions about the board before it goes finally before the Board of School Estimate, and that's when you're going to hear different special interest groups from the community voicing their opinions on whether we have enough counseling, whether the football team's getting enough money, whether we're really committing enough to special education. Again, a very difficult road to walk by this Board of Education, given some of these baked-in costs and the numerous special interests and they're positive special interests, but they do exist to have to deal with.
And on this, there is every 2 weeks, or within a month, there's one session called a workshop.
Workshop
and
meeting.
then separate from that, there's a board meeting.
Correct. The workshop meeting basically goes through the 5 different committees: education and operations and communications, and they go and discuss what they see as being critical items for that period of time.
Are
Just
these
month to
open
month.
meetings?
Absolutely.
They
They're
are.
all open. The workshop meetings are usually held at Wilson, and I always thought it was a much better idea to hold them at the high school because more people can get there, and that's something that I think still should be changed back because it's a much easier way to talk for the community, and they don't feel quite as crowded. And those items are important. So why look, this is a small issue, but we should really be moving the workshop meeting in a much more public forum. And I think public forum, when you have it, just the physical public forum, makes it in fact more transparent as well. And we can talk about transparency at any point.
I'd like to see them at the Common Council chambers, so then it's live. So all these parents who can't make it, who want to be engaged with the process, they can see it
And
live.
hometown can film it. You're saying
Yeah,
we have
whoever,
the ability.
whoever,
Or
yep,
where the
but it's already outfitted for.
Yes, it has the.
The issue
equipment.
is, and I'm glad you brought it up because I have a little bit of a quirk about this. So it's being filmed for the high school channel, but who's watching the high school channel? And don't forget, we only have 25% of the Summit population that actually sends their kids to school, yet 100% are paying taxes. It's for the common good, if nothing else, to be able to be as transparent as possible. And if people are watching, more people are watching Channel 36, that's who should be filming it. It's not a difficult decision to make. That's something that I hope will change at some point.
Well, and I think the council, when we film the council, it actually goes live out on the high school channel, so they still get the benefit of showing it, but then Hometown replays it. So they have the option of watching it live off the high school channel, but then can see us on Hometown. see it on
But to your point, it's about transparency, it's about
Absolutely.
inclusion.
Absolutely.
It's inclusion for the whole community. And I think, look, this is certainly, and Fred didn't prop us here at all. This is not a commercial for Hometown TV as much as benefit it's done, but it is really critical that we, for those people who can't get there, for the elderly, for the disabled, there's a lot of people who want to see us and they can't.
Right.
And I think that's an issue that, I'd like to be a little bit harder on from the community.
Well, let me pause us here because this has been an excellent conversation. I want to thank each of you, Dave, Lisa, Beth, George. For our members of the community, we ask you to tune in for part 2 of a community conversation where we're going to continue this conversation. And we're going to be talking about, more specifically then, getting into the allocation process of the budget, the different stakeholders, and this is where we really need your involvement. Ask questions, think into the process, speak up, and any questions you have, info@hometowntv.org. Follow us on Facebook and YouTube. We'll be back to you in a few moments. Thank you so much.